668. We're at 646 out of 668. So there's like 20 pages left. Wait, we're at 647 out of 668. I was gonna say 69, you demons. Jeez. Can you even do math? Okay. Michelle called this gorge the Dover Gate. Apparently, the cliff walls in this gap were whitish, or had been. So they made their way down North Coppertees, and the cliffs closed in on them more by more and more every day. More every day. Fuck. I can't read, so, touche. They made their way down North Coppertees, and the cliffs closed in on them more every day. The flood filled almost the whole width of the canyon floor, and its flow was so rapid that the ice on its surface had broken into small bergs, which flew off the lips of standing waves and crashed back into the cascade. A furious whitewater rapid with the flow of 100 Amazons, topped by icebergs. The canyon floor was being ripped away, torn free of its bed, and rushing down in red jolts of water, like massive pulses of rusty blood, as if the planet were bleeding to death. Sorry. The noise was incredible. A roar so continuous and pervasive that it dulled thought and made talk almost impossible. They had to shout everything at the top of their lungs, which quickly reduced them to communicating only the basic necessities. But then there was a very basic necessity to shout about. For when they came to the Dover Gate, they found that the canyon floor was almost completely covered by the flood. Their bench below the southern wall of the gorge was no more than 2 kilometers wide, and diminishing every minute. It seemed the whole bench might be torn away in a flash. I might sneeze. Hold on. Or not. When they came to the Dover Gate, they found that the canyon floor was almost completely covered by the flood. Their bench below the southern wall of the gorge was no more than 2 kilometers wide, and diminishing every minute. It seemed possible the whole bench might be torn away in a flash. Maya cried that it was too dangerous to go on, and argued for a retreat. If they circled around and drove up to the dead end of South Coppertees, she shouted, and managed to climb the plateau above, they could drive past the pits of Copperty's Katina and proceed onward to Orium. Michel shouted his insistence that they press forward and get through the gate on the bench. If we hurry, we can make it. We must try. And when Maya continued to protest, he added forcefully, "The head of South Copperty's is steep. The car would never get up it. It's a cliff like these." And we don't have the supplies to add so many extra days to our trip. We don't have the supplies to add so many extra days to our trip. We can't go back. The insane roar of the flood was his only answer. They sat in the car, in their separate thoughts, separated by the roar, as if by many kilometers of space. Anne found herself wishing that the bench would slide from underneath them, or a piece of the south wall would fall on them and put an end to their indecision, to the awful, maddening noise. They drove on. Frank and Maya and Simon and Nadia stood behind Michel and Casey, watching them drive. Sax sat at his screen, stretching like a cat, staring myopically at the little picture of the deluge. The surface calmed for a moment and froze over, and the explosive noise reduced to a violent low rumble. It's kind of like the Grand Canyon on a kind of super Himalayan scale, Sax said, apparently to himself, although only Anne was able to hear him. The Gandaki Gorge is like 3 kilometers deep, isn't it? And Dalgiri and Annapurna are only 40 or 50 kilometers apart, I think. If you fill that with a flood, he failed to recall any comparable flood. I wonder what all that water was doing so high on Tharsis Bulge. Cracks like gunshots announced another surge. The white surface of the flood blew apart. The white surface of the flood blew apart and tumbled downstream. White noise suddenly enveloped them, battening everything they said or thought, as if the universe were vibrating. A bass tuning fork. Outgassing, Anne said. Outgassing. Her mouth was stiff. She could feel in her face how long it had been since she had last spoken. Outgassing. Tharsis rests on an upwelling of magma. Tharsis rests on an upwelling of magma. Rock alone couldn't sustain the weight. The bulge would have subsided if it weren't being supported by an upwelling current in the mantle. I thought there was no mantle. She could just hear him through the noise. No. She didn't care if he could hear her or not. It's just slowed down. But the currents are still there. And since the last great floods, they have refilled the high aquifers on Tharsis and kept aquifers like Compton warm enough to stay liquid. Eventually, the hydrostatic pressures were extreme, but with less volcanism and fewer big meteor strikes, nothing has set it off. It might have been full for 1 billion years. Do you think Phobos broke it open? Maybe. More likely a reactor meltdown. Did you know Compton was this big? Sachs asked. Yes. I never heard of it. No. Anne stared at him. Had he heard her say that? He had. Concealing data. He was shocked, she could tell. He couldn't imagine any reason good enough to conceal data. Perhaps this was the root of their inability to understand each other. Value systems based on entirely different assumptions. Completely different kinds of science. He cleared his throat. Did you know it was liquid? I thought so. But now we know. Sachs twitched and called up on his screen the image from the left side camera. Black fizzing water, gray debris, shattered ice. Boulders like great tumbling dice. Standing waves freezing in place. Collapsing and sweeping away in clouds of frost steam. The noise had risen back to its crackling jet howl. I wouldn't have done it this way, Sachs exclaimed. Anne stared at him. He steadfastly regarded the TV. I know, she said. And then she was tired of talk again. Tired of its uselessness. And it had never been any more than it was now. Whispers against the great roar of the world. Half heard and less understood. They drove as quickly as they could through Dover Gate, following the callous ramp as Michelle called their bench. Progress was nerve-wrackingly slow. It was a bitter struggle to get the rover over the rockfall covering this narrow terrace. Boulders were scattered everywhere, and the flood ate away at the land to their left, narrowing the bench at a perceptible rate. Landslides from the cliff walls fell ahead. Oh my god, is this like what the end of the book is gonna be? Is just... just the walls collapsing in on them. They almost make it. And the fucking tunnel collapse. The tunnel collapses on top of them. The end. Good thing there's more books. Yeah, but we don't know who the narrator... There's been like 5 different narrators through this book, and half of them have died. So I just want to say that the fact that there's sequels does not exclude all of the protagonists dying. But we will be able to continue the story. I'm not going to exclude all of them getting crushed in a rock slide. Boulders were scattered everywhere, and the flood ate away at the land to their left, narrowing the bench at a perceptible rate. Landslides from the cliff walls fell ahead and behind them. And more than once, individual rocks crashed into the car's roof, making them all jump. It was perfectly possible that a bigger rock would hit them and smash them. Like bugs. Without a single bit of warning. That possibility subdued them all. Which was fine by Anne. I'm curious what's written on page 666. Well, you'll have to find out next week, because we will not be finishing the book until next week. It was perfectly possible that a bigger rock would hit them and smash them like bugs, without a single bit of warning. That possibility subdued them all, which was fine by Anne. Even Simon left her alone, throwing himself into the navigational effort and going out on scouting trips with Nadia or Frank or Casey. Happy, she thought, to have some excuse to get away from her. And why not? They bumped along at a few kilometers per hour. They traveled through a night, and then the following day. Even though the haze had diminished to the point where it was possible that they were visible from satellite, there was no other choice. And finally, they were through the Dover Gate, and Coppertease opened once again, giving them some leeway. The flood veered a few kilometers to the north. At dusk, they stopped the car. They had been driving for some 40 hours straight. That's how I feel right now. I feel like I've been reading for 40 hours straight. They stood up and stretched, shuffled around, and then sat back down and ate a microwaved meal together. Maya, Simon, Michelle, and Casey were in good spirits, cheerful to have gotten through the gate. Sax was the same as always. Nadia and Frank, a bit less grim than usual. And it was possible to speak without hurting one's throat and still be heard. And so they ate, concentrating on the small portions of food, talking in desultory manner. Late in this quiet meal, Anne looked around curiously at her companions, suddenly awed by the spectacle of human adaptability. Here they were, eating their dinner, talking over the low boom from the north, in a perfect illusion of dining room conviviality. It might have been anywhere, anytime. And their tired faces bright with some collective success, or merely with the pleasure of eating together. While just outside their chamber, a broken world roared. And rockfall could annihilate them at any instant. And it came to her that the pleasure and stability of dining rooms had always occurred against such a backdrop. Against the catastrophic background of universal chaos. Hey, goddess, how much? Okay, wait, I gotta pause for this, you guys. Mommy's making some money. Hey, goddess, how much does your pig need to donate? If you're a poor pig, 100. If you can't even afford 100 and you're fucking poor, then you should just excuse yourself right now. If you want to make mommy proud, 200. Or 1 million. $1 million. Your choice. I mean, my choice. I'm waiting. All right, come on. I'm so close to being finished. The dining room. I almost just snotted out my nose. Okay, in the dining room, with the pleasure of eating together, while just outside their chamber, the broken world roared, and rockfall could annihilate them like bugs at any moment. That is only $11. Be ashamed of yourself. You're a poor little piggy, aren't you? The dining room, while the broken world roared, and a rockfall could annihilate them like bugs. It came to her that the pleasure and stability of dining rooms had always occurred against such a backdrop, against the catastrophic background of universal chaos. Such moments of calm were things as fragile and transitory as soap bubbles, destined to burst almost as soon as they blew into existence. Groups of friends, rooms, streets, years, none of them would last. The illusion of stability was created by a concerted effort to ignore the chaos they were embedded in. And so they ate and talked and enjoyed each other's company. This was the way it had been in the caves. on the savannah, in the trenches, in the tenements and the trenches, and the cities huddling under bombardment. And so, in the moment of the storm, Anne Claiborne exerted herself. She stood up and she went to the table. She picked up Sax's plate. Sax, who had first drawn her out, and then Nadia, and then Simon's. She carried the plates over to their little magnesium sink. And as she cleaned the dishes, she felt her stiff throat move. She croaked out her part of the conversation. And helped, with her little strand, to weave the human illusion. "A stormy night," Michel said to her as he stood beside her, drying plates, smiling. "A stormy night indeed." And that is all for this week until the end. Hopefully. I think I can finish next week. Also, I have to pee again. Also, I really have to pee again.